Okay, the gender debate part 2. I've spent a day researching and talking to people today about transgender, trying to educate myself on this. And I have to tell you, it's a bit shocked about what I found. Like, you hear dates of, gender identification being recent, more recent than you expect in some posts. Some say it was first floated around in 1910, picked up again in 1955, started activating on it about the 1960s, and get to where we are today. But that's wrong. That's more of that misguided rubbish that people tell you. That's why I said when I was Googling this stuff, I can't make heads or tail of it. But here's what I found out. The gender identification of people has actually been around since, from the dates I can find, somewhere between 365 and 440 BC, before Christ. Now, back in those times, transgender people were respected and looked up to, because they were able to do things that a single-sex person can't do, like see both sides of a debate about how it'll affect a woman as to how it would affect a man. So they usually held roles of social elites. They were artists. They were people who you would go and talk to. Probably a modern day psychiatrist, no doubt. But they were celebrated and not persecuted, which is a shame, because it's never anything I've been taught at school. Even today, I think they struggle to teach anything about it. And I don't think too many people out there in schools would be putting much effort in to track down the origins of how long this has actually been around. So it took me back as a bit of a shock, because, gee whiz, I thought it was the 1980s. I just thought it was a new craze. But apparently not. So, you've got to understand, we weren't educated through school on this sort of subject, and it wasn't promoted, and it was frowned upon. But it turns out the frowning upon didn't start with my generation, I can assure you. What it was is, back in the mid-1700s, and the Spanish and English were pushing their own forms of Christianity around the world and taking over other countries, they would go to a country, and being that transgender people were respected and revered, they wanted to squash any sort of ambitions they might have had to hold on to traditional ways of doing things. So they were strong enough to be able to stand up and say this is wrong, but they needed to be turned into the evil of the community, so that they were no longer on a pedestal. And so they would outlaw any sort of transgender ideas, any gay ideas, any ideas that weren't boy, girl, and heterosexual. They made it an outlaw, they criminalized it, and they educated people to be against it. And anybody who came out saying they were would be victimized, bullied. Back in those days, who knows what they would have done to them, but it would have been horrific anyway. But it was also a jailable term, like you could get locked up for it, probably caught and hoarded too. So it's actually mind-boggling how it comes back to what I keep saying, the world repeats itself, So this is nothing new. It's not even close to new. it's just a secret that's been kept and covered up for generations. So when we see transgender people who are promoting their culture and we frown upon it, then it's really us who are uneducated and not knowing the true history. A long time ago it was called the third gender. American Indians now are calling it the two-spirited people. It's all through history, which was surprising to me because I liked history at school. And I got to tell you, I never once heard a single thing about transgender. Never heard anything about it. Now, apparently, all these other genders that people are calling themselves these days, I don't know, I think it's about 130 of them or something. I haven't really done the research on how many different genders there are. This is still all just makes my brain foggy, got to tell you, because I'm trying to grasp something that I was never educated on at school. I was never educated on by my parents. I was never educated on it by anybody, and it's only because I've been sitting in a hotel room for 5 days racking my brain what to do that it came up when I heard about that school teacher. That's a gender identity issue, but I'm still going to research that one. That'll be another video to come. But the transgender one, I have to say, is crucified by the churches and crucified by the religious beliefs of whatever religion they're pushing. But before religion, and right up until the early 1700s, that's after religion was born, this was something that was respected and revered by many because of the caring nature and because of the knowledge of both male and female, regardless of whether you're a male pretending to be a female or a female pretending to be a male. And it's probably not the right words, and I'm sorry for that, but that's my education. That's what I've been taught, that it was a mental issue, it was an illness, and it's not, it never was, and never will be. So I've never been anti anything. What the next person does, I don't really care. It's your business, you know. I think as long as it's not affecting other people in the way of causing harm or causing them a loss or that kind of thing, then you do what you want to do. It's none of my business. But so please excuse some of the terms I use that may offend people, because this is something I'm only just learning about, and seriously, I'm not going to school for this. I'm Googling, and if you've ever Googled this kind of stuff like the trans history, you know, the word trans was apparently first floated in about 1910. It was picked up again in 1955, and activation of activists began in the 1970s. So for us, that's what we only know about the 1970s, 1980s, when it was really starting to rock and roll, but it's not something that we have much education on, which is a shame, really, because this is part of human history. Now, I listen a lot to a lot of the power talkers in regards to gender description, and they'll tell them, you know, that you're male, whether you're, you know, dressed as a female, get any operation for a female. The argument is that when you die, in 1,000 years, if they dig up your bones, all they'll know is you were a male because of your bone structure. But the physical being, from what I understand, is a physical being. Now, if it is such that we have a soul and it goes somewhere, which I think it does. I'm pretty sure it's something like that. There's definitely something else. Then I would think that the soul itself may not be of what the body is. So there's no hard set rules about what a soul can portray. You can be a guy with feminine attributes for sure. You can be a girl with male attributes for sure. We used to call them tomboys, and the names that were called back when I was at school for guys who were more like girls, there weren't any nice names that came out of anyone. It was just insults, which is a shame because it's partly us because we didn't know, but the majority of the blame comes back to governments. Again, governments, bloody hell, because they set the school curriculum, and it's not something that the school curriculum was willing to teach because it was against religious ideas. So they were persecuted, hunted, and basically annihilated for the persecution of religious ideas. So when you see it from that perspective and you try and put yourself in their shoes for a moment, let's say I'm a guy, so let's say I'm a guy, but let's say I had feminine attributes and I wanted to come out and say, mum, dad, I'm a girl. That would be something really hard to do. Especially even in today's society, that would be hard to do. Imagine go back 20 years, holy dooly, it would have been suicide. Yeah, so you probably would have got your head punched in by your dad, that's just the culture, and that was his education, that was just something that doesn't happen. You just don't do that, and it all comes down to the awareness of what it is and how it works. So I'm still going to study some more on it because I'm only scratching the surface, to be honest. Like I read, I don't know, 20, 30 cover letters so far about books, and sorry, it's real late at night here, books and stuff, and I've got my head around it. Like I understand now that it's nothing new. It's nothing that should be feared. In fact, it should be a little bit more acceptable across broader spectrums. Like I'm not so warm and fuzzy on the terminologies. Like for me, it doesn't really matter. If you're going to get offended by someone calling you mate, if you look like a guy, well, I'm not going to know that you got feminine attributes until I speak to you. So if I, hey, go on, mate, so it's not, there has to be some give and take in this from both sides. People like me who are uneducated about this subject need to be probably a little bit more considerate when it comes to if someone says to you, look, I identify as a girl, that you probably call them a girl, but those who identify as a guy should be, you should probably call them a guy. But I understand that there's going to be times where if you look like a guy and a guy walks up to you and says, there you go, mate, that there's a level of flexibility on both sides. You can correct them politely and say, hey, look, I identify as a girl, and that's fine, and hopefully they'll remember to call you that from then on. But if they don't, I probably would recommend not to get too offended by it. Not because it's right, but just because they're still learning. The world at the moment is going through a learning curve that's such a 90-degree bend at supersonic speed. So it's just one of those things that I guess the mainstream culture and mainstream beliefs are going to have to be a little flexible and open-minded about this. And I think that the transgender people need to be a little bit flexible, that if they're mislabeled, not to be so offended by it, because I've seen a lot of videos where a transgender person will go from naught to kill zone over a classification of whether they're a boy or a girl, and for me, I think that's a bit over the top. Like, okay, you understand that there's something different happening, but you're going to have to bow your head a little bit, because it's going to take a while for people to fully get the understanding of what this is about and how it works. It's just one of those things, It's not that they're deliberately offending you by calling you a guy if you represent as a girl, or vice versa. It's just our eyes tell us what we see, and that's what we call it, So, if I see a dog, I don't say, "Here, cat, come here and have some food." It's just not the same, If I see a guy that identifies as a girl but doesn't look like a girl, looks like me, talks like me, then I'm going to go, "How you going, mate?" And that's not an offence. If he says to me, "Oh, look, I actually represent as a girl," well, mate's pretty non-binary as far as I'm concerned, but if they got, a little bit upset by that, then they said, "Oh, look, I identify as a girl, so, just refer to me as a girl," then I guess I'll try. Can't promise I'll get it 100% right though, because I'm old school, I've been old schooled. So for us Gen X mob, it's a lot harder for us to just go, "Yep, that's what it is now, and let's change." It doesn't work like that. Our brains aren't operating like that. Our brains are operating on everything we've been brought up as, everything we've been educated as, everything we've been schooled in, and this was never a part of it. So you're opening up neurons in a brain that have never been activated on this subject. So now the subject is expanding and growing so fast. You go on hypersonic at a right-hand turn, it's going to get messy. But I think if most people can slow down and take a breath before they jump off a shotgun, and say, "Well, you said this and you did that and we did this and you did that," I think that a bit of tolerance on both sides would probably work better than no tolerance on either side. And that's something that I've seen on a lot of videos so far, is that you've got the religious side who are absolutely staunch. They're not moving. They're against it 100%. If you're that, then you're not us. 100%. And I guess the church looks a bit like a religious war. If they bow down on this subject, what else do they have to bow down on? Well, seriously, religion's bowed down on so many laws in their book so far, it's unbelievable. But this is just another law they're going to have to bow down to, because in time it's going to take over. In time it's going to take grip, and in time it's going to start being respected again. Like I said, the world repeats. So I remember when I first joined disability services back in the early 90s, there were a lot of gay and transgender people in that environment, and that seemed to be where they all congregated. And I understand why, because it takes a nurturing person to work in that environment. And these people were extremely nurturing, extremely patient with the clients. And they did it so good, it was good to learn from them. But on the same token, it was an eye-opener for me too, because I didn't understand anything of what's going on back then. I was looking thinking, wow, this is a crazy world. But anyway, I would probably recommend anybody who has a thought of coming out, I would probably recommend you just say it. If you want to identify as someone else, then just say it. And if there's a struggle within a family cell about that, then I would recommend probably counselling. But I think if you were to breach the subject with family first about what they think about transgender and what they think about someone who is a trans, and you'd be surprised, parents already know. Parents already know, like seriously, they know their kids. They already know. They may not have said it. They may not admit it to themselves, but they already know. You know, if you've got a girl climbing trees and throwing rocks in the river and having fun with the boys, you know. She's not playing with Barbies. She's not wanting to cook a cake on a weekend with her mum. She wants to go out with Dad and go shooting and ball driving and doing all the boy stuff. You know, it's already written on the wall. You know, not saying that everybody who's a woman who does that is trans. I'm just saying they're showing male attributes. You may not want to swap sides, but you're still showing a male attribute. So, you know, and I'm not saying that women should be at home baking cakes either. I just know there's going to be some trolls out there that are going to try and pick this to shit, you know. So I'm just covering all terms. It's not saying that at all. I'm just saying I'm just looking back at when I was a kid, how genders were seen as roles, and I'm only reflecting to what I was brought up like. So in the world that I was brought up in, that's pretty much what a gender role was. So, you know, you're talking back in the early 70s. So when I was growing up, that's what it was. You know, you just got to look at the magazines. You never saw a guy standing in front of a stove on a magazine in a 1970s Vogue magazine. Hell no. It would be the woman who was standing in front of it. But me, I like to cook, so I don't think that's relevant. But I'm just saying, just for the trolls out there, I'm not gender Pacific rolling what happens in a household. I'm just saying that the parents know by the behaviour of the child that there could be some gender lines crossing, and that in the future something may come up with regards to a child coming out and saying they're opposite gender. I think for the parents, I think if you have an inkling, then I recommend that the parent do the research like I have. And I mean, you've got to do a fair bit because there is so much conflicting information. Seriously, like, you know, you've got documents saying it was started in 1955, another document saying it was started in 1910. The term trans was started in 1910. But if you go back in the ancient history, what they call the third identity was around 356, I think, to 440 BC. So every culture's had them. India's got them, well, had them and still does. All the old China had them, like the ancient China, ancient Greece. All the ancient tribes had them. You know, so, and they weren't frowned upon. They were revered for nurturing and for the mind of their decisions and good consultation that they could give. So my advice to anybody out there who's like me, I'm only done, 2 days of work on this so far, so I've only got 2 days of knowledge, but I can tell you there's a lot to learn. There's a lot more coming out of it, and there's a lot more to be discovered, but it's going to take a bit of time for me to research it some more. But I'm going to sidetrack off this subject for a little bit, and my next one I'm going to look into is the trans identity with regards to people wanting to be called a cat and a dog. But I'm going to have a look into that one next. But this one, I've opened my eyes a little bit more today than what they were yesterday, which is a good thing. But, and for the trolls out there, I don't care how you want to try and trash this idea, but and for those who are religious, I'm sorry if you get offended, but at the end of the day, this is just what it is. I'm just stating the facts, and I'll keep doing it because it's fact. I'm now educating myself beyond what schools would teach and what religion would teach, and learning actual history of ancient civilizations, because we can learn a lot from it. So I don't know where this journey will take me in 5 or 10 years' time, but I think that anything I learn about the ancient history is going to be good. So I know a fair bit already, but I didn't know about this subject. So it honestly didn't cross my mind that this existed that long ago. I thought this was a 1970s phase, but clearly it did, and clearly our government and schools and churches have let us down on this one. I, I hate to think that this may have some ending to the burning of the witches and that kind of stuff. I hope not, but I'm going to go back and look into that as well. There's a lot that I'm going to look into because it opens a dozen doors as to where this could go. So I'm going to research it and find out for myself more about this subject. But tip your hat to those who have come out and said that they're transgender, because you're brave, and it's good that you are. It's time that that people were awakened to the truth in the matter, and not snowballed by all the garbage fed to us through school. The schools aren't teaching us anything. At the end of the day, they're dumbing us down so that we're uneducated. So the internet's here. The internet's out there. You've got chatbots now that would certainly help you out if you want to go and have a chatbot on human history. I'm sure the chatbot will come up with the answers. So technology now is getting that great that our history is being more and more displayed. And no matter whether you're religious or whether you're a government or whether you're just a hater as general, I think that you're not going to be able to hide it for much longer. Things are going to be coming out left, right and centre soon. I'm just waiting for that 90-degree bend at a hypersonic that's going to hit the civilization, because the internet's awake and it's alive. So everything that's being written is being transcribed onto the World Wide Web. So it's becoming more and more accessible. And as it does, more and more secrets will be let out. Well, that's all I got to say on that for the moment. I'll keep researching, but I'm going to take a break from researching this just for a little bit. And like I said, I'm going to go chase up the trans identity issue. So, because I don't think trans identity and transgender is the same thing. I know transgender is about male and female, but or both, or whatever subject, whichever avenue you want to choose to go down. But the gender identity, I'm not sure. That was the second video I did this morning. Sorry, I was on this video. First video I did this morning about how people identify as animals, and whether the historic animals, half human, half animals, were real, or whether they were people identifying as those animals. So I'm going to follow that one up and see where that takes me. But I'll get back to you when I get some more information. You have a good night, and start Googling, start learning, because this stuff shocked the shit out of me. Have a good night.